Alrighty, friends, welcome back to History with Tim. Like I said, we're going to keep doing this tier list, and at the end of the week, we're going to have our next biographic video out on our next Battle of Gettysburg figure, and that will be James Pete Longstreet. Peter was not actually his middle name. But with that said, today we are continuing what we started on Monday. That's right, we're going to be doing the rest of our generals tier list. Now, we ended with John F. Reynolds on Friday. I put him at A tier. We're going to continue on today. Our next general will be none other than the famous, the great Winfield Scott Hancock. So, with that said, before we get into it, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you guys are enjoying the content. I decided to take a break from all the original videos and stuff just because, it'd be fun do this a little bit. I like to throw these in a little bit. I haven't done an epic rap. I'm not epic rap. Oh wow, I haven't done a Sabaton video in a hot minute, but we might do one of those next week. But I'm happy to start getting back to doing 3 videos a week. Thank you all so much for your support. It's been fantastic. You guys are really helping this channel grow. The only thing that sucks is it looks like I'm going to get to 1,000 viewers before I get to 3,000 viewed hours. But with that said, before I stumble on too long, let's get into it. All right. So, like I said, we stopped with General John Reynolds on Monday. So, next up is none other than the superb, the great Winfield Scott Hancock. Hancock was born February 14th, 1824 in Montgomeryville, Pennsylvania. He will graduate West Point in 1844. He will end his career in the military as a major general. That's, again, a lot of these guys on the Union side are brevets, but a lot of them also stay in the military after the fact. So that just speaks a lot to Hancock as an officer, that he not only became a corps commander during the war, but even after the war is over, he is made a major general in the regular army. Now, he will lead the Second Corps from 1863 until the end of the war. In that time, he will become wounded several times. However, the Second Corps is the most veteran corps of the Army of the Potomac. Now, this is why, when you see a movie like Gettysburg or something, there's this big moment where Longstreet's talking to Lee, and they're talking about Pickett's charge, and he's like, "That's Hancock over there," and Hancock's not going to run. He has it on us that we had on Fredericksburg. Hancock's division at Fredericksburg was one of the divisions that got the closest to Maury's Heights. His division holds famous units: Zook's Brigade, the Pennsylvania Brigade, the Irish Brigade, all these famous units that we know about during the American Civil War. They are in the Second Corps. That's the Clover emblem. My reenacting group, one of them, I was in the 88th New York. That is a regiment of the Irish Brigade. I also was in the 14th Brooklyn, which is the 1st Corps. That's Cutler's Brigade. But with that said, Hancock will be pivotal. Now, Hancock, to understand him, you need to understand he starts the war as a major. He's a major in the quartermaster department in California. Now, his superior officer at that time is Albert Sidney Johnston. Now, Albert Sidney Johnston will be the Confederate Army commander at the Battle of Shiloh, who gets killed by accident. Well, I don't know. Yeah, it was probably by accident. He got shot in the boot, and they didn't realize it had cut an artery, and he bled to death without anyone really realizing what was happening. But he'll come back to the West, and he'll serve in bureaucratic positions at first, but under George B. McClellan, following the death of General Israel Richardson at the Battle of Antietam, Hancock will be put in command of the 1st Division of the 2nd Corps of the Army of the Potomac. This is Caldwell's Brigade, Zook's Brigade, and at the time, General Thomas Francis Meagher's Irish Brigade. I don't know if you all have picked up on this yet, especially in my biographic videos. I like the Irish Brigade. I have roots in the Irish Brigade, but back to what I'm saying, he'll be the division commander up until Chancellorsville. Chancellorsville will see him promoted to Second Corps commander in the period around Chancellorsville. He will be in command of the Second Corps at Gettysburg, where he will be wounded on the third day of fighting, heavily involved in the battle. He will go into recovery. They almost thought was going to die. He will serve throughout the war, and then at the end of the war, they'll put him in command of the Veteran Corps, where a lot of his men actually will be put. The Veteran Corps, if you ever see pictures, they wear those light blue blouses. Actually, very beautiful uniforms. But he'll be instrumental at the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse, and he, of course, Gettysburg is his big battle. He actually did not earn his nickname at Gettysburg, though. He earned it by George B. McClellan. McClellan liked Hancock. He found him to be a very capable commander. Hancock, however, post-war, again, much like all these generals, he would stay in the Army. He was in command of a military district of Columbia. He was a member of the Civil Service Commission as well as the Board of Commissioners. He also was a very big member of the Democrat Party. Now, the Democrat Party at this time in history aligned its... well, they still kind of like that, I guess. They aligned themselves very much with the immigrant class, and Hancock was seen as a champion to groups like the Irish, Germans, and Italians, groups that served in his corps. The Garibaldi Guard were in the Second Corps. The only, I guess you could say, ethnic brigade that wasn't in the Second Corps was the Iron Brigade, because that was mainly made up of Germans, and that was in the First Corps. But Hancock was very much there was a lot about him that Democrats thought was very likable. And he would run against James Garfield in 1880. He would lose, and he would remain on as a military district commander. He actually would take over Grant's funeral in New York City, where the both of them were living. However, he would die February 9th, 1886 in Philadelphia. He is buried in Pennsylvania. His wife's not, which is interesting, but he is buried in Pennsylvania. He was a very capable commander, very strong leader. I'm a George Meade stan. I'll admit that. I stand by George Meade, period. He's my favorite general. I have all his biographies. Hancock, if not for Hancock, Gettysburg would not have gone the way it did, is the best way. And I think one of the greatest failures of Cold Harbor from Grant and Meade is not recognizing what Hancock told them. Hancock told them this is a horrible idea. They are entrenched. They are not going to move. And both men, and you could call it ego. You could call it not wanting to repeat the mistakes of Gettysburg campaign. You could call it anything. Cold Harbor was a ginormous mistake on part of Grant and Meade. And Hancock was the one that recognized it. But you know what? With that said, yeah, I'm going to put him at S. I will. I'm going to stand by that, and you can argue with me about it, and that's fine. But I'm going to stand by that. I think he was a very capable commander. Again, last time I spoke about this idea of knowing what is within your means and so on. But I think he, in his position, went far beyond. On the second day at Gettysburg, you have him supporting both flanks, the left and right of the army, while also he's defending the center. Gibbon's divisions being split up because he's throwing them everywhere. He's putting confidence in his officers. He's supporting other corps. He's taking control of the Third Corps in order to make sure the line does not completely falter, while the 5th Corps and 6th Corps and 12th Corps, all these corps are being dumped in to help with the problem. Meanwhile, who's at the center of it? Hancock. And at this channel, we stand up for George Meade, the forgotten hero of Gettysburg. But the best decision Meade ever made as a commander was putting his trust into Winfield Scott Hancock. And with that, I move forward. All right, next we have General William Stark Rosecrans. Very interesting one here. One of the only Italian generals. He is Italian. He was born September 6th, 1819, in Kingston, Ohio. He will graduate West Point in 1842. Now, again, I say he's Italian. He's born from Italian immigrant parents. Which, you look at people like Hancock, Butterfield, Sickles, Custer, even Longstreet. These are Northern European names. These are English, Irish, Scottish, Dutch. This is an Italian man. So and you have von Steigel and stuff like that, which he's not on here either, which is kind of weird. But he'll be the commander of the Army of the Cumberland, Battle of Luka, and Battle of Corinth. He achieved significant victories through his performance. He, much like a lot of the guys in the West, was subject to criticisms. He was very much criticized for his tactical retreat that led to the Confederate victory at Chickamauga. He will be one of these guys in the Union, a very rare one, that will not stay in the Army, especially being an Army commander. He will go into the civil service, though. He'll become an engineer for the government. As bureaucratic positions, just not in the military capacity that he used to be in. And he'll serve in the U.S. House of Representatives and be the U.S. consulate minister to Mexico, which is very important, especially in post-Civil War. Great book by Alan Taylor called The American Civil War discusses not only what's going on in the United States, it's talking about what's going on in Mexico and Canada as well. So very interesting. And, here in the United States, we forget that there was a full-scale European invasion of Mexico during our Civil War, led by the French. A lot of us forget that. Theodore Roosevelt wanted to start a war over that because they breached the Monroe Doctrine. And he was actually the one that added the Roosevelt Concordian, I believe it's called, where he said, if you come, we're going to kill you. We're going to fight you. So, but Rosecrans is I'm gonna put him here. I'm gonna put him at D. He's gonna go there. It sucks because I just did this beautiful soliloquy for Winfield Scott Hancock, and Rosecrans was a capable commander, but the thing was, I don't think he was adaptable. I think he could win battles, but I think he was much stuck in this mindset of let me do it this way because it worked. And, the thing about being a field commander, you can't just keep doing the same things than your enemy, especially in a war like the American Civil War. The majority of the war, you're fighting the same guys. Like, the Army of Northern Virginia was fighting the Army of the Potomac. The Army of the Tennessee was fighting the Army of Mississippi. And then it later became known as the Army of the South. Like, you were very much fighting the same guys a lot of the time. And sadly, Rosecrans, I think, did not adapt. And I think that's his downfall. And it's a pity because I think he had it in him to be a very good commander. Now, with this, I go to, as we know on this channel, I love this guy. George Britton McClellan, born December 3rd, 1826, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He will graduate West Point in 1846. Now, he will be the second General-in-Chief of the Union armies. Now, the first will be Winfield Scott. You see him, my large friend, all the way at the end of the list there. But he will be the second. He will lose this position very quickly. He's one of these guys, we often use the term on paper. On paper, Lil Mac is a great general. He's logistical. He's the one that brings in the reorganization of the Army of the Potomac. He has these masterful strategies that, on all counts, should work. Strategies don't mean anything if you can't do them, though, is the reality. The Peninsula Campaign, he was afraid of Joe Johnston's defenses, and he refused to attack even though his subordinates kept saying, we need to attack. and his superiors. Lincoln was telegraphing him saying, can you do something? Can you fight? Can you please? Later, just to find out that it wasn't even really Joe Johnson in the Army of Northern Virginia. It was just literally cut down trees made to look like artillery. And he burned down Williamsburg in retaliation for that, which is, you should go to Williamsburg. If everyone watching this, if you're in continental United States, I would highly suggest go to Colonial Williamsburg in Virginia. Very interesting place. The city actually never really recovered after McClellan burned it down. It actually became his haven for freed men and women after the war, where a lot of them went. It sadly became a shanty town because obviously Johnson wasn't helping freed men and women very much. But someone, I think it was actually the Rockefellers, came in the, I think the 70s or 80s, and they completely refurbished it and made it look the way it did when it was the capital of Virginia. Very cool place. But back on McClellan, this is why these videos go long. I go into these long tirades. But back on to McClellan. McClellan is an example of a guy that's good in paper but terrible in action. We can look at something like the Battle of Antietam. He had reserve corps, not reserve divisions or reserve regiments. He had reserve corps. Should not have been a stalemate. Had he pushed harder, Lee would have collapsed. And, you're on your ground. Maryland is a free state. Maryland is in the Union. So, Maryland is where Washington, D.C. is. Had he been a little more ambitious, for all we know, the Army of Northern Virginia would have been destroyed. They would have been cut up. They would have been cut off from Virginia, and the war, for all we know, could have ended at Sharpsburg, Maryland. But he was cautious. He was scared. He created this beautiful army, but he was too afraid to use it to fight. One of my favorite quotes Lincoln said, he's like, if I gave you 5,000 men, you would say the enemy had 50,000. If I gave you 60,000, you'd say they had 600,000. And it's so true. He was a very good administrator. He was very good logistically. Horrible in action, though. And he'll actually be the one who runs against Lincoln in the election of 1863. No, 64, sorry, my apologies. In the election of 1864. And, thank heavens for Sherman and Grant, because a lot of people think that he would have tried to have an armistice with the South, and the United States would have remained divided. So, I'm actually, and this I know is going to be a very, very controversial opinion. Very controversial. And I'm going to stand by that. I think you could be as good on paper as you want, but if you're not actually using your army or fighting the fights that need to be fought, you're a horrible general. Period. You could be, it's very much, I really don't know many generals I can compare to this, that all you're doing, like maybe the guy during the siege of Diob during the Second Schleswig War, the German that just said, oh, I'm going to fight him the way I fought Napoleon. Like, if you're not willing to fight, then you have no place leading an army. That's just how I see it, and I'm going to keep him there. And to be honest, he was not a very good general. He thought he was smarter than everyone. He has a little bit of Butterfield. He has a little bit of Bragg in him. And I mean, not Butterfield, Sickles. He has a little bit of Sickles. He has a little bit of Bragg in him. He was a very smart man. But when I am doing these tier lists, you could be smart, but if you're not fighting, you're not fighting. Like, nothing's getting done. He did later in his life serve as the governor of New Jersey, though, and the president of the Atlantic and Pacific Telegraph Company. And he would pass away in Orange, New Jersey, October 29th, 1885. Now, George Henry Thomas. All right, George Henry Thomas, what a guy. What a character. Let me move Sedgwick down here real quick. Thank you. Led the Army of Cumberland. He would be the successor to Rosecrans. He was actually called the Rock of Chickamauga because he would not move. Very good commander. He would be the one who beats John Bell Hood during the Tennessee campaigns. Battle of Nashville, Battle of Mill Springs. He's one of these guys. Like I said in the earlier videos, he's one of these guys that after the war will remain in the military as a district commander and administrative positions. He'll die March 28th, 1870 in San Francisco, California. He's remembered as a dependable and effective leader, known for his solid defensive tactics and decisive actions in crucial battles. He was very respected by his subordinates. So you got to look at, he was part of this army that marched to the sea too. We look at the March to the Sea and we think, oh, Sherman was in charge. Not exactly. Sherman was pretty much Grant's equivalent in the South in a weird way, in the Deep South. Grant had the Army of the Shenandoah, he had the Army of the Potomac, and a few more. He conglomerated a few armies into a grand army. And that's the same thing that Sherman will do. He'll conglomerate into a grand army. And by doing that, they picked competent officers. And that army was actually Oliver Howard and Joseph Hooker. He is going to go right here at B. Right here at B. I think he was very competent. He was very good. All right. James Longstreet. James Longstreet is a very interesting character, to say the least. Longstreet is born in South Carolina. He's raised from a young age up, goes into the military. He's not wealthy, though. He's not from a wealthy family. His family has a farm. They are farmers. He's one of 9 children. He's one of 9 children. And he goes to West Point. He graduates. And he serves in Mexico alongside one of his best friends, Longstreet. Now, Longstreet has a very interesting story, and I am very excited for the video I'm putting up Friday about him. But it's one of controversy. It's one of, had he done something different? Like, why did he stall Gettysburg? Which, his story is being retold, just like Meade. Their stories are being retold, and it's about time they are, because a lot of guys' lives kind of got ruined by the politicking of the time. So, I think Longstreet definitely deserves his due, so to speak. And you got to look at stuff like, let's look at Fredericksburg for an example. Fredericksburg, you have the attacks on Maury's Heights. Maury's Heights is commanded by Longstreet, but there also are other attacks happening by Stonewall Jackson defending the Confederate right, and you have Jeb Stuart patrolling the right. The Confederate right flank will collapse at one point to George Meade's division. That's a fact. Maury's Heights never fell. Longstreet, like, there's a famous quote when Jackson died. Jackson was wounded, where Lee said, Jackson has lost his left hand. I've lost my right. I would debatably say Longstreet was held in higher esteem. I think the worst thing about the Jackson-Lee relationship is the fact that they kind of just bolstered each other up. I think Longstreet was a voice of reason. And I think that's more important. I think as an officer, you need your subordinates to contradict you sometimes to give you different perspectives. And I think Longstreet was that guy. And I think, sadly, his reputation suffered for it. Because he was the only one that recognized during the Gettysburg campaign, he said, this isn't Maryland. This isn't Antietam. We're not fighting near Virginia. We are literally deep into Northern Territory. Like, this isn't good. So, with that, I'm going to put him in A tier. And I stand by that. And, I think he, much like Grant and Sherman, are victims of the lost cause myth. I think they needed a Judas, and he was the easiest pick because he was the one who embraced reconciliation and was one of the first officers actually returned. He signed his oath of allegiance to the United States. And I think Longstreet is a person who's getting a very well-deserved revamp in history. Joseph Eggleston Johnston, born February 3rd, 1807, Farmville, Virginia, graduated in 1829 from West Point. You guys do love Johnston on this channel. Johnston, sadly, will be someone who does suffer from the politics as well. He was not very well liked by Jefferson Davis. Jefferson Davis thought he was too cautious. He was the founding commander of the Army of Northern Virginia. He would go on to command the Army of the Tennessee. He also would go on to take command of the Army of the South during the Atlanta campaign. That was the army John Bell Hood was in charge of. So he will actually surrender his army after Lee surrenders the Army of Northern Virginia. He'll surrender April 26, 1865 in Bentonville, North Carolina, ending pretty much the last major armies in combat. Actually, ironically, he became very close friends with Sherman after the war. I believe he was a pallbearer at Sherman's funeral, to which he refused to take off his hat, and he said if it was the other way around, he would do it for me. He would serve as a congressman from 1875 to 1879, and then he would die in Washington March 21st, 1891. I think Johnson was actually probably one of the better generals. I think he actually, I'm just going to put him up here as well. I think he is set, people don't understand, being cautious in the North was a crime because you didn't have a reason to be cautious. You had the supplies, you had the manpower. You know, sure, places like Cold Harbor in the wilderness, that was a terrible decision. But most of the time, you had to be aggressive because the issue was the Confederacy did not have that luxury. And that's why they were winning at the beginning of the war, because Lee knew that was the federal mindset, is that the Confederacy doesn't have the luxury to be aggressive. Now, if you notice, the two guys I have from the Confederacy in the A tier are both considered two of the most cautious generals, and they were the two who suffered the most politically because of the war. And I'm gonna keep them there because I think that's 100% correct. Time for my boy. Time for the boy, guys. You know, the boy is back in town. General George Gordon Meade, born December 31st, 1815 in Cadiz, Spain. Yes, graduated 1835, West Point. He was a major general. He was actually in the topographic engineer corps. He would join the army at Manassas. He fought in most major battles early war, June 28th, 1863. He was not asked if he wanted command. He was ordered to command the Army of the Potomac against Lee. Again, like I said earlier in this video, best decision Meade ever made was placing Hancock in command until he arrived. Meade, the reason Meade, I think, I give him more credit at Grant, is because Meade is the first general who thinks ahead of Lee. Lee's great tactic is he's a chess player who anticipates the next move, and he was playing against opponents that didn't do the same. He did, though. He knew what Lee was going to do because him and Lee had very similar military careers. So he was able to anticipate what was going to happen next, and that's why Gettysburg was as crushing as it was, because the thing was, his lines were so perfect that he was able to move the 12th Corps from Culp's Hill down to the Round Tops to help and then move them back just as quick. He was able to have the 6th and 5th Corps ready as a reserve. Just a great general. Fantastic. I did a series on him. We stand George Meade on this channel. Fight me. I will defend him till my dying day. His mom was also Irish, so... he'll die in November 6, 1872 in Philadelphia, and he's buried at Laurel Hill Cemetery in Philly. I know, it's weird, but it's true. I love him. I do. But it's true. Nathaniel Bedford Forrest, July 13th, 1821, Chapel Hill, Tennessee. He was a plantation owner, a slave trader before the war. Again, one of these guys that didn't go to West Point. He was by Shelby Foote, who is not a historian, he's a novelist, considered him the greatest officer in the Confederate Army. He was a good officer, but he also was a very controversial officer. In 1864 at Fort Pillow, he massacred many Union soldiers and African American troops who were attempting to surrender. And infamously, he is the first Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. I think he was bolstered by the Lost Cause myth as a apostle, so to speak. The way to think about the Lost Cause myth is that Lee is Jesus, and then you have Jubal Early, Forrest, Richard Ewell, A.P. Hill. Those are the apostles, and then Longstreet is Judas. That's a way. That is kind of a sneak peek into the Lost Cause. That's how they look at it. So Bedford Forrest was looked at kind of as that kind of character, and he wasn't. He was a horrible person, actually. You could debate him all day, but at the end of the day, actions speak louder than words, as we say. And he was a terrible person. Granted, both sides did terrible things to each other. That's just the part of war. But he was the one that decided to take it out of the war and bring it to civilian life by establishing the Ku Klux Klan. So, with that said, and I'm sorry to my Southern viewers if you disagree with me. I apologize for that, but I'm just going to stick to my guns and my moral and principles, and that's where I'm going to put him. Robert Edward Lee, January 19th, 1807, at Stratford Hall, Virginia, graduated West Point in 1829. He'll leave the U.S. Army as a colonel. That's why you'll notice he always wears a colonel uniform as a Confederate general, because Lee actually did not agree with secession, and he actually did not agree with slavery. He found both institutions evil. Upon leaving the federal government, he will actually free all the slaves in the Lee name. That's a very important distinction. His wife, Marianna Custis Lee, owned the Custis slaves. He didn't have a right to free them. But he will be commander from 1862 until 1865. In fact, at the closing stages of the war, Jefferson Davis names him supreme commander of all Confederate forces. Obviously, he's defeated at the Battle of Gettysburg. He wins the great victories at Chancellorsville and Fredericksburg. 7 days battle. Fought to stalemate at Antietam. After the war, he'll become president of Washington College, which is now Washington and Lee University, in his honor, where he actually pushed forward reconciliation and the integration of the freed men and women into society. And he is, up until very recently, was considered the most beloved general in American history. He had principles, he had standards. To be honest, his downfall was his own ego, as horrible as that is to say. He was a little full of himself after all his striking victories. And I think because of that, that's why Gettysburg was so bad. I think that knocked him down a peg. We actually have a great video on his attempt to resign, as he, again, a principled man, tried to take responsibility for the Gettysburg campaign. But he was ambitious officer. He knew what to... He listened to his subordinates, which is very important, and his men loved him. He was all the check marks of a good army commander, and the fact that his men loved him the way they did says a lot about his character. So I will put him in at A tier as well. So we are 3 commanders, Confederates at A tier. We have 2 Union at A tier. And that's about to change because William Tecumseh Sherman, born February 8th, 1820, Lancaster, Ohio. Graduated 1840. I'm automatically putting him at an A tier. Sherman was probably one of the best generals. Sherman actually is the founder of Louisiana State University. At the time, it was a military academy. So any of my LSU friends, congrats on that. But Sherman was one of the few generals who saw how stupid the conflict was. He called it out. He wrote a letter to the at-time president-elect Lincoln, to inform him this is a terrible idea. Like it's going to be crushing to the South. It's going to be horrible. What happens? And he was right. He will institute Grant's order of total war, and famously, he will march to the sea. He will succeed Grant as commander of all U.S. armies after the war when Grant is made president. Ooh, I'm so sorry. He also will be at the Battle of Shiloh, Vicksburg, and, of course, the Battle of Atlanta. And like I said before, Joe Johnston will surrender to him in Bentonville, North Carolina. He will die February 14th, 1891 in New York City. And, he's another guy that gets pulled into the Lost Cause mythos. He's Grant's mad dog. He was a lunatic. He burned down Atlanta just for the hell of it. It's not true. In fact, he didn't find out that Atlanta burned until he was awoken by the flames. His men had taken the city, and obviously, jubilantly, they burned down the city in retaliation. Because what happens is when you give the order for total war, the soldiers get out of hand. But I do believe he's A tier. This is going to be a hard one. My Winfield Scott, born June 13th, 1786, Dinwiddie County, Virginia. He was actually a lawyer. He studied law before he became a general. He will serve in the War of 1812, Battle of Chippewa, and Battle of Lundy's Lane. He will be the overall commander of the Union, well, not the Union, of United States forces in the Mexican-American War. He will be the one who orchestrates the landings, the largest amphibious landings in North America, I believe, to this day, because no one else has done an amphibious landing like this. Amphibious landing under fire. He will be the one that lays siege to Veracruz. He'll march on Monterey. He'll march on Chapultepec and march on Mexico City. The thing is, now, he also ran for president. He's the third one that ran for president. But he's a very interesting character in all of this. He's very, he's a Fleming, what are they called? He's very much, he likes to puff his feathers, so to speak. He designed his own uniforms and all this. The man was highly overweight. But he doesn't actually, he's not in the war that long. He's the commander-in-chief at the beginning of the war. He's actually the one that makes the Anaconda Plan, which honestly worked. Strangling the South. It worked. The issue is, though, he retires so early in the war. When you look at the Battle of Manassas, we don't say, well, Winfield Scott screwed it up. We say Irvin McDowell screwed it up. He retires after Manassas. He takes responsibility for it, which is very noble and honorable. But he's the one that creates the Anaconda Plan. And the Anaconda Plan is very vital for the war, because that is actually what really does lead to the South losing. If they can't get supplies in through Texas, it's over. And that's what happened with the capture of Vicksburg. I'm going to put him in a B tier. He was a good general in his time. I don't want to throw shade or anything, but the Mexican government was being run, at least the army was being commanded by Santa Anna. And Santa Anna was not as good a commander as he's made out to be. I think the Mexican army probably had better generals, but the issue was the Mexican government was afraid, and the only person they knew of prominence to lead the army was Santa Anna. And I think Santa Anna was just more vain than Winfield Scott, and that's what won him the campaign. But that's where I think I stand on that. Let me get my last one ready, because this is a difficult one for me. So, John Sedgwick's born September 13th, 1813 in Cornish, New Hampshire. He attends West Point, but he actually did not, he didn't graduate, which is very interesting for a commander like this. He reached the rank of Major General, and he would become the commander of the 6th Corps of the Army of the Potomac. He did fight in Gettysburg. He'll be killed at the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse. He was a brave man. That's what he is very commonly remembered for. Actually, multiple officers wept when he died. He was a good man. He was a good general. He cared for his men. He fought for his men. He was instrumental at the Battle of Gettysburg. Gettysburg would not have gone the way it did if not for him. And with that said, we're going to put him at B tier. So, as we're bringing this to a close, S tier, we got Ulysses Sam Grant. We got Winfield Scott, the superb Hancock. We got A tier, John F. Reynolds, James Old Pete Longstreet, Joe E. Johnston, George Gordon Meade, Robert E. Lee, and William Tecumseh Sherman. B tier, we have Don Carlos Buell, Richard S. Ewell, George H. Thomas, Winfield Scott, John Sedgwick. C tier, we have A.P. Hill, George Custer. D tier, Dan Butterfield. Not Jesus Christ, I keep saying Dan Butterfield. Dan Sickles and William Rosecrans. And then F, we have Braxton Bragg, George B. McClellan, and Nathaniel B. Forrest. I feel very confident with those. I think they're very fair. I think I did my best to give at least a honest view of all of them. My thing is, we have to look at history by retrospect. And again, people like Forrest, yes, both sides did terrible things to each other. But the issue is, there's kind of a code of honor back then that if men are surrendering, you don't kill them. And the Confederate, and people will defend this, be like, well, it was an order from the Confederate government. And it's like, does that make it right? Does that make it right that you execute them? No. So, that is my tier list. Thank you so much for joining me, guys. I hope you enjoyed. I really like doing these tier lists. It definitely keeps me busy. Gives me a nice little break. Gives me fun interaction with you guys. If you have different opinions, leave the comments below. I'm always happy to hear them. But with that said, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed. Please like, share, and comment. If you're new to the channel, subscribe. If you're returning to the channel, subscribe. Hit that little bell icon below. Get all the notifications whenever we have new content up. Thanks so much for joining us. And if you're able to, again, I know it's hard times, but it's hard times for our national parks too. If you can't, perfectly understandable, but if at all possible, we ask that you please, if you can, donate to our National Parks Preservation Fund. The link will be down below. And with that said, we will see you in the next one.